Antonio Brown was once one of the most dominant wide receivers the NFL had ever seen. But at 37 years old, he's now facing serious legal trouble, financial problems, and a future that looks nothing like the one he seemed destined for. And the deeper you look into his downfall, the more shocking it becomes. On May 16, 2025, Antonio Brown was wanted in connection to a shooting outside of an Adin Ross boxing event in Miami. Several videos on social media showed Brown getting into a fight with multiple people following matches at the event. A 10-match card hosted by popular streamer Adin Ross, sponsored by Steak, Kick, and Brand Risk Promotions. The footage that spread across social media was the kind you don't easily forget. Video posted on social media showed Brown involved in a fistfight with several people outside of the event. A man who police later identified as Brown was then seen pursuing someone with what looked like a pistol in his hand. Shots were then heard off camera. What those videos showed was not a random act. This was not some stranger Brown bumped into. One of the alleged victims, Zulkarnain Kwame Nantambu, reportedly said he has known Brown since 2022. Nantambu, who is a jeweler, claims that Brown did not return a pendant that he had let him wear at a Floyd Mayweather event in Dubai. Court documents also claim Brown falsely accused Nantambu of stealing $3 million in jewelry from him. Nantambu was reportedly jailed in the Middle East for a month before he proved his innocence. There was already bad blood, in other words, and on that May night in Miami, it boiled over in the most violent way possible. According to prosecutors, Brown allegedly grabbed a handgun from a security guard at the event and fired 2 shots at Nantambu, with whom he had already had an altercation. According to an arrest warrant, cell phone video shows Brown with a firearm in his hand and advancing towards Nantambu on a sidewalk. The alleged victim has said a bullet grazed his neck. After that night, the Miami police initially detained Brown briefly. Brown released a statement on social media in May following that incident. Police temporarily detained me until they received my side of the story and then released me. But detectives kept reviewing the footage, and what they saw told a different story. In June, the Washington Post reported that Brown was wanted by police after they received video that showed Brown punching a man, then appearing to take the gun of a security officer and run towards the individual while firing 2 shots. An arrest warrant was issued, and Antonio Brown vanished. Police were not initially able to locate Brown after issuing the warrant, and Brown did not turn himself in. But Brown's own social media posts indicated that he'd been living in Dubai for the last several months. He was thousands of miles away, seemingly untouchable, because the UAE and the United States do not have a formal extradition treaty. Although the UAE and the United States lack an extradition treaty, which would provide procedures on which types of crimes warrant extradition and under what circumstances, the countries in 2022 signed a mutual legal assistance treaty. As described by the U.S. State Department, the treaty calls for judicial cooperation, including with respect to facilitating prosecutions. That legal thread was enough. Miami police confirmed that U.S. court marshals had captured Brown on Thursday, November 6, after a 4-5-month search for the former NFL star. Brown, 37, was being held by U.S. Marshals in Essex County, New Jersey, pending further extradition to Miami. Former NFL star Antonio Brown was returning to Miami to face an attempted murder charge, stemming from the May shooting, with his lawyer filing a not guilty plea on his behalf. The man who had once been the most feared wide receiver in football, who had stood in Super Bowl end zones, who had tormented defensive backs for a decade, was now in handcuffs, being walked through a New Jersey detention facility by U.S. Marshals. Prosecutors allege that Brown fired a weapon during the confrontation, while Brown has maintained that he acted in self-defense and has formally invoked Florida's Stand Your Ground law. If convicted, Brown faces up to 30 years in prison, including a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years due to the firearm enhancement. The judge set a hearing to consider the Stand Your Ground motion to dismiss for April 2026 and wants to try the case before the end of 2026. At 37 years old, Antonio Brown is staring down the possibility of spending the next 2 decades of his life in a Florida prison. And to understand how he got here, you have to go back to where everything started, to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the player this man used to be. Before the mugshots, before the bankruptcy filings, before the viral footage of gunshots echoing outside a Miami boxing event, there was a player who, for a very specific window of time, was the most dominant wide receiver on the planet. Not just the best of his era, not just a Pro Bowl talent, the most productive receiver by the numbers in a 6-year stretch that the NFL had never seen before and hasn't seen since. Brown played college football for the Central Michigan Chippewas, twice earning first-team All-American honors as a punt returner, and was selected by the Steelers in the 6th round of the 2010 NFL Draft. The Pittsburgh Steelers took him in the 6th round, with the 195th overall pick. That is the kind of draft position reserved for project players, late-round gambles, guys who might make a practice squad if they're lucky. Nobody drafted in the 6th round at wide receiver is supposed to end up in Hall of Fame conversations. Brown ended up in Hall of Fame conversations. Brown fashioned the most prolific 6-year stretch for a receiver in NFL history, topping 100 receptions and 200 yards receiving in each of the past 6 seasons. That is not a number that gets appreciated until you sit with it. 100 catches and 1,200 yards, 6 consecutive seasons. It had never been done before, not by Jerry Rice, not by Randy Moss, not by Marvin Harrison, by none of the receivers who are already enshrined in Canton, Ohio. Since 2011, Brown had been the most productive wide receiver in the NFL, ranking first in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. Brown had 100 or more receptions in 6 straight seasons, the longest streak in NFL history. Brown is one of just 5 players in NFL history with 100-plus receptions and 15-plus receiving touchdowns in a single season. All other 4 players are Hall of Fame wide receivers: Randy Moss, Marvin Harrison, Jerry Rice, and Cris Carter. With Pittsburgh, Brown led the league twice in receiving yards, twice in receptions, and once in receiving touchdowns. He also earned 7 Pro Bowl selections, including 6 consecutive and 4 consecutive first-team All-Pro selections. By 2017, his 4-year, $68 million extension with Pittsburgh cemented him as one of the NFL's highest-paid wideouts. In 2018, Brown's combination of on-field dominance and high-profile endorsements with Nike, Pepsi, and more pushed his net worth close to $50 million. By every reasonable measure, he was on the path to immortality. Brown finished his NFL career with 928 receptions, 291 receiving yards, and 83 receiving touchdowns across 146 games, plus nearly 30 return yards. Those numbers line up with several receivers who already sit in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which is why many analysts still describe his prime as one of the best stretches ever for a wideout. But here's where the story gets complicated. Because even during the years when Brown was shattering records, the cracks were already forming. They were small at first, easy to dismiss, the kind of eccentric behavior that gets filtered through a lens of he's a superstar. That's just how superstars are. But one moment in January 2016 became, in the eyes of many, the turning point that explains everything that followed. The story of his downfall often traces back to one violent moment in January 2016. Late in a wild AFC wildcard game, Cincinnati Bengals linebacker Vontaze Burfict delivered a helmet-to-helmet hit that left Brown motionless on the turf. The shot put him in concussion protocol, kept him out of the next playoff round, led to a league suspension for Burfict, and sparked long debates about player safety. Public timelines of Brown's off-field issues often circle back to that night, which many fans believe was the turning point. Brown suffered several severe injuries during his NFL career, including concussions. He was notably concussed during a January 9, 2016 AFC wildcard game, following a helmet-to-helmet hit by Bengals linebacker Vontaze Burfict. The former NFL star claims to have suffered from loss of consciousness, memory loss, and more as a result of his injuries. No one can say for sure that one head injury caused everything that followed. Brain trauma remains hard to connect to specific behavior. Still, the image of Brown on the turf in Cincinnati hangs over the rest of his story. After 2016, the numbers on the field remained historic, but the noise off it grew louder and louder and louder. By 2018, what had been background noise had become a full-volume roar, and no team, not even the Pittsburgh Steelers, was willing to keep the volume up anymore. The departure from Pittsburgh was not quiet, and it was not sudden. The relationship between Brown and the Steelers, his NFL home for the first 9 years of his career, got rocky during the 2018 season. Brown butted heads with Pittsburgh's 2 alphas, coach Mike Tomlin and QB Ben Roethlisberger. Brown even got benched for Week 17. At a team practice in the week leading up to the Steelers' regular season finale against the Cincinnati Bengals, Brown got into a dispute with quarterback Ben Roethlisberger. Brown then skipped the week's remaining practices, leading the team to deactivate him for that Sunday's game. By the end of the 2018 season, the relationship between Brown and the Steelers' front office had collapsed. The franchise traded an elite receiver in his prime to the Oakland Raiders for third and fifth round picks, a return that showed how eager Pittsburgh felt to move on despite his talent. Oakland offered a fresh start, a massive contract, a chance to reset. Oakland inked a deal with Brown for 3 years and $50 million, including $30 million guaranteed. And Brown arrived to Raiders camp, famously in a hot air balloon. That detailed comic as it was turned out to be an omen. Everything about his time with Oakland was theatrical, dramatic, and utterly unserious. The NFL changed its helmet rules, and Brown was no longer permitted to wear his favorite style, the Chute Air Advantage. Brown, who said other helmets obstructed his vision, filed a grievance against the NFL, threatening to retire if he didn't get his way. The arbitrator ruled in favor of the NFL. Brown filed a second grievance later that month, losing again. Then there was the cryotherapy incident. While using a cryotherapy tank for recovery, Brown severely burned the bottoms of his feet. After not wearing the proper footwear required, he posted the images online, missed more practice time. And then when the Raiders fined him for his absences, Brown posted the fine letter on social media for the world to see. A frustrated Mike Mayock fined Brown $54.00. The next day, Brown confronted Mayock at practice and reportedly called him a cracker. Brown reportedly had to be separated from teammates and punted a football. Raiders general manager Mike Mayock said it was time for Brown to either be all in or all out. Brown never played a single regular season game for the Oakland Raiders. After all of that drama, all of those headlines, all of that guaranteed money, he was released before the season even started. The New England Patriots took the gamble. Tom Brady wanted him. Quarterback Tom Brady pushed for Brown, who scored a touchdown in his only game with the team. That window closed almost as fast as it opened. Then sexual assault and rape allegations hit in civil court, followed by more disturbing text messages. The Patriots released him within weeks. On September 10, 2019, Brown's former trainer, Brittany Taylor, filed a lawsuit, alleging he sexually assaulted her on 3 occasions. She claimed that he exposed himself to her and raped her. Brown and his legal team denied the allegations. After a series of sexual assault allegations, public disputes, fights, and erratic behavior, Brown faced criminal charges of felony burglary with battery, burglary of an unoccupied conveyance, and criminal mischief. He was granted bail with a bond set at $110,000 and was required to wear a GPS ankle monitor upon his release. The ESPN reporter Adam Schefter said at the time that he did not envision Brown returning to the NFL ever again, and for a moment, that looked like it might be the end of the story. But Tom Brady had not given up on him. When Brady left New England for Tampa Bay, he pulled the strings to get Brown one more chance. Brown eventually returned to the field with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after an 8-game suspension for violations of the league's personal conduct policy. With Brady again vouching for him, Brown helped the Buccaneers win Super Bowl LV, which should have been a highlight moment. It should have been redemption. Instead, the most remembered chapter of his Tampa Bay tenure was his exit. During a Week 17 game in New York in 2021, he pulled off his jersey, waved to the crowd, then jogged to the locker room mid-game. The Bucs cut him soon after. No NFL team has signed him since. Just like that, the most productive receiver of his generation played his last NFL snap. Not in a retirement ceremony, not with a farewell tour, or a tribute from the city that loved him. He walked off the field half-dressed in front of 80,000 people and simply was done. Part 4. The financial wreckage. From $80 million to negative net worth. Even before the arrest warrant was issued, even before the flight to Dubai, Antonio Brown's finances were already in ruins. The kind of ruin that is difficult to comprehend for a man who earned what he earned doing what he did. Antonio Brown made roughly $80 million on the field during his NFL career. $80 million. For reference, that is the kind of money that, if managed with even basic competence, generates enough passive income to live comfortably for several lifetimes. Yet somehow, by 2024, Brown had arrived at a place where he had to file for bankruptcy. According to Celebrity Net Worth, Antonio Brown's net worth in 2025 stands at approximately negative $3 million. In May 2024, the former Super Bowl champion filed for bankruptcy in Florida. declaring $50,000 in assets against roughly $3 million in debt. Read that again, $50,000 in assets after $80 million in career earnings. That is not a story about bad luck. That is a story about a decade of compounding decisions, legal settlements, unpaid obligations, mismanaged ventures, and the loss of every corporate endorsement that comes when a player's reputation disintegrates in public. The bankruptcy filings reveal that Brown owes money to former agents, marketing firms, and unpaid child support. From 2022 onward, Antonio Brown faced legal troubles, canceled endorsements, and mounting debts, which caused his net worth to drop. In May 2024, he filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, reporting only about $50,000 in assets against nearly $3 million in liabilities. Even the assets he thought he had began slipping away. Former NFL wide receiver Antonio Brown struck a settlement with a trustee, managing his bankruptcy estate to resolve several fights over his luxury Florida properties. In an effort to pay back his creditors, a trust connected to Brown will return a property in Odessa, Florida, valued at up to $4.5 million to his bankruptcy estate for immediate sale. Antonio Brown's former Florida mansion is now on the market for just under $4 million, marking the latest development in a series of financial and legal challenges involving the former NFL wide receiver. Was officially listed after being turned over as part of Brown's bankruptcy proceedings. According to TMZ, the estate spans more than 13,000 square feet and garage space designed to accommodate up to 11 vehicles. That house, 13,000 square feet on a lake, an 11-car garage, was not long ago a symbol of everything Brown had built. Now it is a line item in a bankruptcy estate, listed for sale to pay back the people he owes money to. Brown's post-football ventures, including a brief foray into rap music, failed to revive his financial standing. Legal disputes and unpaid obligations further compounded his problems. There was also the brief and chaotic episode of Brown attempting to enter team ownership. On March 2023, Brown joined the ownership group for the Albany Empire Arena football team. In April, Brown told reporters that "I'm the owner, 100% owner of the Empire." A statement denied by co-owner Mike Quarta, who said that Brown and Quarta each owned 47.5% of the team. 4 days later, Brown bought Quarta's ownership stake for $1, growing his position to 95% of the team. Then on May 3, Brown's representatives told the Times-Union that Brown has no personal ownership or control over the Empire, and that the team is actually owned by a foreign entity named Antonio El Allah Express Trust Enterprise. It was a farce, and it was symptomatic of a broader pattern. A person who had once operated at the peak of professional discipline, the route running precision, the obsessive route tree mastery, the relentless off-season work, now operating with zero coherence in the public domain. By 2025, his net worth turned negative, and this status continued into 2026 despite the protection of his Florida homestead. The fall of Brown is more than one bad decision or one ugly night in a cold playoff game. It shows how quickly a career that seemed historic can crumble. Through conflict with teams, serious legal trouble, financial collapse, and the toll of a violent sport. The man who was worth close to $50 million in 2018 now has a negative net worth in 2026, and his most expensive remaining asset, his freedom, is the one now being contested in a Miami courtroom. Part 5, the trial, the verdict on a legacy, and what comes next. As of 2026, Antonio Brown is 37 years old, under court supervision in Florida, awaiting a trial that could determine the rest of his life. Since being extradited from Dubai late last year, Brown has been under court supervision in Florida. He pleaded not guilty after returning to Miami and was released on bond, with conditions including house arrest and GPS monitoring. Brown has been granted permission to leave the state of Florida as he awaits his attempted murder trial. Brown, 37, was arrested and charged with second-degree attempted murder in the state of Florida. The medical exemption that allowed him to travel outside Florida speaks to another layer of the story: the physical toll of a career spent absorbing punishment. At the highest level of professional football, Brown suffered several severe injuries during his NFL career, including concussions. He was famously concussed during a January 9, 2016 AFC wildcard game, following a helmet-to-helmet hit by Bengals linebacker Vontaze Burfict. The former NFL star claims to have suffered from loss of consciousness, memory loss, and more as a result of his injuries. His defense team, meanwhile, is pressing the stand your ground angle with intensity. Part of the defense motion to dismiss reads that Brown's use of force on May 16, 2025 was fully justified. Brown reasonably believed that the alleged victim intended to cause him serious harm. Moments earlier, he had been physically attacked by an attention-seeking convicted fraudster with a documented history of violence toward Brown, as well as toward others, including law enforcement. Brown's attorney told the AP that Brown acted in self-defense the night of the shooting. The actions he was forced to take were solely in self-defense against the alleged victim's violent behavior. The attorney said, Brown was attacked that night and acted within his legal right to protect himself. The stand your ground law in Florida has been used successfully in high-profile cases before, but this case has a complicating variable that the defense cannot easily dissolve: the video. According to an arrest warrant, cell phone video shows Brown with a firearm in his hand and advancing towards Nantambu on a sidewalk. The video, the warrant reads, captures two shots which occur as Mr. Brown is within several feet of Mr. Nantambu. Advancing on someone is not typically what self-defense looks like, and prosecutors will make that argument forcefully when the case goes to trial. Since prosecutors allege Brown fired a weapon during the confrontation, this key factor significantly raises potential penalties under Florida law. If convicted, Brown faces up to 30 years in prison, including a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years due to the firearm enhancement. The judge set a hearing date of April 2026 to consider the motion to dismiss and would like to try the case before the end of 2026. And then there is the matter of hope, the political kind. Brown supported Trump in the 2024 presidential election and even joined Trump on stage at a rally. But if he hoped that support would lead to a presidential pardon, he's out of luck. Brown faces state charges which cannot be pardoned by the president. So where does that leave us? Here's the full picture. A man who at his absolute peak was the most productive wide receiver in the history of professional football, who earned $80 million, who won a Super Bowl ring, who had the Hall of Fame within reach, is now 37 years old, bankrupt, with a negative net worth, his lakeside mansion being sold off by a bankruptcy trustee, and staring down a potential 20 to 30-year mandatory prison sentence in the state of Florida. On paper, he delivered a top 20 career at his position, with numbers comparable to those of other enshrined receivers. Now he leaves a complicated picture, one that once saw a clear road to the Hall of Fame, vanished by a pattern of destruction that no amount of talent could survive. The title of this video says Antonio Brown's life is over at 37. And the honest answer, looking at the full span of evidence, is this: the life he was supposed to have, the Hall of Fame induction, the broadcast booth, the legacy of being mentioned alongside Rice and Moss. That life is already over, has been for years. What remains to be determined is what replaces it if the stand your ground motion fails, if the trial proceeds, and the video evidence carries the weight that prosecutors believe it does. Then Antonio Brown will spend his 40s and quite possibly his 50s inside a Florida prison. The 6th-round pick, who became the most statistically dominant receiver of his era, will have his final chapter written not in Canton, Ohio, but in a courtroom in Miami-Dade County. Pretty much everything Antonio Brown has been connected to over the past 4 years has ended in chaos, and that includes his brief tenure with the Buccaneers, when he abruptly stormed off the field and removed his uniform in a 2022 game against the Jets. That image, a shirtless Antonio Brown waving to the crowd as he jogged off the field in New York, was always going to be the ending of his football story. Nobody who watched it thought it could get darker. And yet here we are, at 37, Antonio Brown's life, as he built it, is over. What the courts decide next will determine whether any version of a future life remains at all.